So I have a confession to make. Since I feel like you've already decided you're going to keep me no matter what, I can tell you this. I love the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I have probably laughed more at lines from that movie than anything else in my entire life. Of course, it was hugely popular when I was in college. I was in a service fraternity, not the regular kind, the service fraternity. I would not vote for anyone to be able to join unless they knew the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow. But anyway, the reason I bring that up, there's one part, they're seeking the Holy Grail. It's making fun of the Arthurian myths. And they come up to this castle and they say, hey, we're on a quest. We seek the Grail. And the guy in the castle said, well, we're not interested in that because we've already got one. And of course, shenanigans ensue because it's a comedy. But I just kept thinking of that line today, on this whole week as I was preparing for today. Because here, the wise men, the magi, come rolling into Jerusalem. And they say, we're looking for the king. And everybody's like, we've already got one. And shenanigans ensue. But it's just so interesting how everyone responded to this. There's a king born, but there's already a king. And do we have room for another one? What's going to happen? We have a spiritual king causing great angst in the kingdom of the worldly political king. And it's this conflict that drives Jesus and his family out of Judea. Of course, he was raised in Nazareth, but, he was born in Bethlehem, the city of David, where the prophecy said the Messiah would be born. But because of this, he was driven out. They spent time in Egypt. And later on, people would say, he can't be the Messiah. We know where he grew up. He's from the wrong side of the tracks. But it was because of all these shenanigans that Jesus was a refugee for part of his life. And it kind of seems like it's all about the wheres and the whens. The beginning of Matthew is all genealogy and kind of setup and stuff. And we don't get a lot of dialogue. The first thing somebody says out loud is, where is the king? So these guys, they were following a star. And again, we have various traditions and songs and things like that. They were most likely not actual royalty, not like literal kings, but they were important, definitely. They were wealthy, definitely. Most likely from the kind of the line that, if you'll remember, Pharaoh had his wise men and magicians. You may recall that Daniel was considered one of the magi in Babylon because he could interpret dreams. So this was a pretty prominent group, probably Persian or Babylonian. We don't really know, but we can think of them as priests of a sort. They were not priests like we would think of, but these were people who sought meaning in the world by observing the stars and various things that we would loosely call the occult, though that doesn't have the sinister edge in ancient history that it does now. So they kept an eye on these kinds of things, and it's so interesting that these outsiders who were not brought up, steeped in the prophecies and the traditions of Jewish lore, were the ones who kind of came in and caused all these conflicts, where we've got people saying, a king's born. Wait a minute, we've already got one. And it's amazing that people who did not have the advantage of the Old Testament scriptures. Now, it's possible they had encountered Jewish people. It's possible they had heard some of this stuff, but they were not people who studied the scriptures in temple every week. They didn't have that advantage, and they did not know the God of the Jews that we worship. And yet, somehow, because they were seeking meaning in the world, they found something that all of the people who knew God and studied the scriptures completely missed. That's a really significant part. Now, they were using non-biblical means to find truth, but it still led to the God of the Bible. That's really quite amazing. The real story wasn't the star part, but God calling people to him, just as he called Abraham and his family out of a land of idols. He called these people somehow, and they heard him. And it makes me wonder, don't mishear this. This is just me thinking out loud. Is it really about the technique? Does God find or speak to people who are honestly seeking truth, even if they're just flailing wildly and grabbing hey, my neighbor says this will tell me the truth. I'm going to look at this. Watch this video. Go to this meeting. Read this in the newspaper. And I just wonder if it's more about the honest seeking for meaning and purpose and direction that's the important thing. I don't know. And so you may have heard this, but just to make sure we're all together, they say we saw the star in the east. And that caused me confusion, so I want to make sure you don't ever experience that confusion, at least not again. If you think about where Israel is, I should have had a big map so I could use a pointer. Pointers are fun. You can whack things with them. So just imagine a big map and me authoritatively whacking the map. A laser pointer. Okay. Don't give me a laser pointer. That's a terrible idea. Brett would get it eventually. So if you think about where Persia, Babylon, that sort of thing is, looking east from there, that's away from Israel. That's the other way. And so I can remember, as a snarky college student, finally figuring this out. I'm like, oh, well, obviously it was all men because they went the opposite way and circled the globe instead of asking for directions. If there had been one wise woman, it would have been, they could have been there for the manger scene instead of showing up 2 years late. It was all because of that. That's not biblical. I just said that because it's funny. So what really, the more literal and probably more correct translation is they saw the star at its rising. Everything rises in the east. That's definitely true. So they saw it when it came up and immediately knew this was something different and something really important. And then, they followed it. So clearly they went to the west. And the amazing thing being that a light in the sky didn't just continue, rising and falling like everything else, because that's the nature of things. So they saw it at its rising, and I'm fairly certain, I don't have any hard proof, but fairly certain this wasn't like a supernova. Some people like that idea, but supernovas would just rise and fall and rise and fall. Maybe a comet, because they do have a big tail as big as a kite. Then somebody pointed out that was a song and not the Bible. Maybe. So, yes, possibly, but it doesn't need to be any of those things for this to work. It was definitely something special, something God ordained. We even speculated during Sunday school that this could have been something like the pillar of fire, the angel of the Lord that led the Israelites, because it literally went before them to Bethlehem. We are trying to figure out how a star hovers over a building. Tonight, just go outside and find a star and try to figure out what building it's over. Just try it. So I'm just saying that we don't need to be overly literal about anything. This was God leading people from afar, from outside the faith, outside of prophecy, outside of Scripture. And by his miraculous power, he got them to follow the light. The star of Jacob that had been predicted so long ago. And again, this was a thing. This is what they did. Somewhere in the ancient lore, there was like this special constellation that came up, and they marked it down and said, oh, the destroyer of Asia has been born according to the stars. And that was the day that Alexander the Great was born. Of course, when you can look back and make things match, it helps. But I'm just saying, they did things like this. They tried to predict the coming of important people. But they come in to Jerusalem looking for this king, and Herod's troubled. That's not surprising. Herod, incidentally, his title, the King of the Jews. So they walk in and say, where's the King of the Jews? We heard he was born. We want to worship him. And he's like, oh, no. But it says all Israel was troubled too. They were upset. They were bothered by this when they should have been excited. And so Herod wants to know where this is going down. He wants to know when the star appeared. And so he's calling his people in. And they're like, oh, it's definitely Bethlehem. I mean, clearly. And none of them say, that's funny. There's been this funny star over Bethlehem the whole month. Nobody puts the pieces together, even in this conversation. But see, Herod is just dealing with a threat. He feels a threat to his position, to his control, to his rule. And so he wants safety. He wants unquestioned power. I mean, he has wealth and incredible military power, but he's thinking, if this is, the son of David, if this is the Messiah, the Christ, then my position is threatened. I've got to take care of this. And I would just like to make a side note and say, thank goodness we don't have anything in common with Herod. I mean, wouldn't that be that would be terrible if we looked at this guy and found anything that we could relate to. I mean, when would any of us worry about giving up control or feeling threatened by someone ruling our life that wasn't us, or get nervous because somebody would make all our decisions for us? I mean, so even Herod, we have to say, well, there's things we can learn from that. And we're not exactly like the Magi either. I always try to find myself in Bible stories. That's just kind of how I do. I mean, they didn't know God. They didn't have the scriptures to work with. We did. They responded to the star without the benefit of God or scriptures. And they saw and heard something that the faithful people didn't. They were obedient despite not having all the training, if you will. And these guys, let's just say there were three. We don't know for a fact there were exactly three. It doesn't matter. These learned, powerful, wealthy people saw Jesus, probably as a 2-year-old, and threw themselves at his feet. Not a single Sunday school class between them. Not a single revival service. Nobody giving them any training or preaching. But they knew. And they just unquestioningly threw themselves at his feet. Gut level reaction to the power and majesty of God in this little body. They heard God's voice and obeyed, even though they didn't know that God. I don't like being shown up by a bunch of foreigners. That's what I'm saying right here. These guys. And I just wonder about their experience hearing the voice of God. It was said as it was through a dream, which is a pretty common theme throughout these nativity stories. Different people hear from God in dreams. They heard from God and they knew it was something to obey. They knew that first time hearing God's voice. Their sense of knowing when it was right to obey despite their position in the world. I mean, and again, they were flying blind through most of this. They didn't know that Herod, the earthly king, was against Jesus, the spiritual king, until God told them, hey, don't go back to this guy. They didn't know. But trying to think of the original readers, this is hard. This is a hard mental leap to make, to go from us seeing it from our perspective to thinking of the first people who got the Gospel of Matthew in their hands and reading this story and realizing that an old story had suddenly become a right now story. That's really amazing. This abstract idea of someday the Messiah will come to a concrete, he is here. He is intruded into our world. He is here. For a Jewish person hearing this story for the first time, This is their Bible come to life. All of the prophecies, all the times that God said, here, I know it's going to be bad, but here's what's coming down the line. This was their scripture coming to life. I think that's one of the reasons Matthew and others are so careful to connect the birth of Christ to the past. And it goes all the way back to the fulfillment of conversations God had with Abraham, fulfillment of years of longing, of hope, of dreams, and it's not just the hopes and fears of all the years of Israel. It's not just the hopes and dreams and wishes of God's chosen people. This was for everybody. And this reached beyond, from the very start, reached beyond the faithful chosen. It was a message for everyone who was seeking for truth and meaning. And I think part of our challenge as the church today is that there are a lot of people out there who are interested in truth. Does that seem fair to say? A lot of people who are looking for their lives to mean something. And I mean, they get snapped up by cults because the cult gives them something to believe in. They'll join a gang because the gang gives them something to believe in. Sometimes it's Life Cycle or Soul Cycle. These exercise groups become their thing, or a diet or whatever. And so many people are just looking for something to organize their life around, to provide meaning. And the good part is they're feeling that yearning. And the bad part is they never think, I wonder if the church has any answers for me. We can't really do much about the failures of the church over the years that has made them not think we have answers. But the truth is, we know what they're looking for. We've found it. We're already here on the inside, if you will. We know God and we know the scriptures and we know what they're looking for. And we have to help them connect their search to find that light with the one who is the light. That's part of our job. And sometimes we get caught. This is a big part of Jewish tradition, and this, and when we get into our talk about the end times, one day, I think you may have said this during your Lottie Moon thing, there will be a day at the end of time when everyone will bow before the throne of God. But I don't think we should just wait and see how it all shakes out. I think part of the Christmas message is that we take that, the coming of the kingdom started when Jesus arrived. And we don't want to wait until the last days for people to know him and recognize how powerful he is. We want to bring people to him so they have the chance, just like the Magi, to recognize his power and his majesty and the worth of throwing themselves at his feet in obedience. There are so many out there that are searching, and we might not like their methods, but just they're flying blind. And it falls on us to help them find that way. And so, looking back, again, I always try to think, are we going to be the nation of Israel, the sleepy people who saw some things happening and knew some prophecies, but just figured it probably wasn't going on right now and it probably didn't mean anything? Are we going to miss the coming of God right before our eyes just because we're in our rhythm and we're thinking, well, we've already kind of got this figured out. I don't really need any changes around here. I don't think we want to be like Herod. None of us is going to go out and kill a bunch of small children to preserve our sense of control, but most likely, all of us, I'm just saying most likely, at some point we've kind of talked ourselves out of something that we knew God was saying, tried to ignore something he was saying because we didn't like where it was going. That's a control issue. That's a Herod thing. We don't want to be like that. We don't want to be insecure and worried that if we really trust God that he's going to tell us to do something we don't want to do. We don't want to be like that. Maybe we do want to be a little more like the Magi, people who were ready to drop everything and take on a significant journey, not really knowing what they were getting into. And again, people without Bible, without knowledge of God, dropping everything and going for it. And think how many times we get caught up in, well, we need to take a little more time on this. We got to plan some more. I'm not sure if that'll work. Do we have the budget? And we find so many reasons not to just do what God calls us to do. They followed a God that they didn't really know personally. They brought gifts for a king that they didn't really understand. And here we are struggling to keep control of our resources and making sure that we've got everything taken care of, making ourselves feel safe. So when we think of this story, let's remember the seekers, the people who are, just flailing around, looking for something to buy into, to believe, something that gives their life a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. These people, they need a king, and we need to make sure they know they've already got one. We're going to close with our hymn of commitment, Take Up Your Cross, number 494. Let's stand and sing together. All right, don't forget, we'll have about a 5-minute break if people need to slip out or get out of choir robes or something, but we will have our called business meeting in just a few minutes. May we go forth as people seeking the truth ourselves and helping others to follow the light. In the name of the Father, Son, and